Matter, would you please stand for the national anthem, and you will be led by one of Gawler's favourite singers, Mr. Ric Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Are we ready? Australians all, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds with nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, just drop it down here. I better get some glasses out. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Ralph Hatcher for leading us in the national anthem. And as if any of you haven't heard him before, you know why he is a very well-known singer in the area. And yes, he is a cousin, in case anyone needs to know. We welcome the guest of honour, Dr. the Honourable Bruce Charles Eastick, Member of the Order of Australia, Chevalier of the S.A. Priory of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem Knights Hospitaller, Australia, Bachelor of Veterinary Science, Inaugural Fellow of the Australian College of Veterinary Scientists, Roseworthy Diploma of Agriculture, Justice of the Peace, and we are now to add a further honour that was bestowed on him last Friday by the Roseworthy Old Collegians Association. He has a unique honour of being named the Icon of Roseworthy, or Roseworthy Icon. After that, Bruce, we're going to just call you Bruce for the rest of the night. Otherwise, we'll be here very late. Distinguished guests, and that's as far as I'm going in that division, because all of you are distinguished because you are present to honour a distinguished citizen. About 5 months ago, where does that put us? Back in April, I think it was. When was it, Brian? Brian Tom, sitting over here, rang me and said, Bruce is turning 90 this year in October. I think the community ought to recognise all of the work that he's put in over the years that he's been here. And so, with a certain degree of machinations around the place, it was taken on board by the Gawler and District Special Events, which is an arm of the Rotary Club of Gawler, but this is not a Rotary event. This is a community event tonight. And so we set out to find all of the people that had been somehow involved in the same organisations or in some way with Bruce over the many years that he's been here. The first thing we did was to ask Bruce for a list of organisations he'd been involved with. Back came, you remember the old foolscap size paper? It's bigger than A4. Every line was filled with a name of an organisation, and I got 2.5 pages. When he commenced his veterinary practice, he secured an agreement with the late Jack Curnow, who was the owner of Aero Motors Holden dealer in Gawler. Provided he changed his car every 20,000 miles, which in today's terms is 32,000 kilometres, he could obtain a new one at an agreed changeover cost. Pretty good business move, Bruce. kept the cost of motoring down, didn't it? Bruce did a lot of travelling as he developed his practice well out into the districts around Gawler. And the shortest time that he owned a car, to the point where he reached his planned distance covered, was 13 weeks. That means he drove an average of 2,641 kilometres each week. And that's almost enough to cross Australia from south to north every week for 13 weeks. Bruce drove safely, but many times I saw him go past our home, which was only 3 doors away from Bruce and Dawn's residence and his surgery. I saw this large blob of mud with the rough shape of a car come past our house with 4 round blobs, which I think were wheels, carrying it, and 2 wiper clear spaces where the windscreen appeared to be. Bruce did not slow down for mud or flood. Jack Curnow told me the best trade-ins he ever had were Bruce's cars because they were always run hot. Not overheated, but run warm and hot, not driven, once a week to church or something like that. And there are 2 guests here tonight who worked at Aero Motors and worked on Bruce's cars, who could attest to that comment, I think. I'm not going to name them, but they might put their hand up sometime. There's some around the place. So Bruce ran his veterinary service from 1952 to 1970. And if he had, as he did that, he would have owned 36 cars, an average of 2 per year. All of them Holdens. When Bruce got elected to Parliament in 1970, because of rules about doing contract work for the government as a veterinary officer, he had to resign from his veterinary practice. Bruce, if you hadn't got elected to Parliament and were still going with your practice, I think Holdens would still be open. It's now my great pleasure to invite Dr. Ric Matthews to tell you a few things about Bruce's time as a veterinary practitioner.
I still use that. Yeah.
Just a few minutes to keep the history tale good.
Good. Great.
Oh, by the way, another little commercial, shall we say. I've already been approached by a member of the audience that they would like copies of the documents that are on the table. Now, there are only 3 on each table. We used up half a ream of paper as it was. And we had a limited budget. So, if you'd like one, please come and see me and give me your email address, and I can email whichever one or both if you like. Okay? Dr. Ric Matthews practiced at about the same time as Bruce.
Yeah.
And he obviously had a lot to do with him, and I'll ask him now to tell a little bit about Bruce's veterinary work.
Thanks, Art. Distinguished guests, yes, I was in a neighbouring practice which was at Oakbank, and in those days that was a neighbouring practice. Probably 20 or 30 vets now between Oakbank and Gawler, so, but we were neighbours then. I feel honoured to be asked to say a few words about Bruce's veterinary career because he's got many colleagues and partners and people he went through university with that are much more qualified than me to say something, but the problem is they're all dead. That's right, isn't it, Bruce? Many young lads in our day, back in the 40s when we were teenagers, wanted to be farmers. Bruce and I were the same, and we thought probably a good start would be to attend an agricultural college, get a few clues, and we both did. And One of the subjects at Roseworthy, where Bruce was elementary veterinary science, and together with that and working with the various animals on the farm, Bruce decided that a veterinary career might be a bit more interesting than farming. He started at Roseworthy in 1944 and completed the course in 1947, end of 1947, and after 2 weeks he was off to Sydney to do the veterinary course. It's a 5-year course, and he started it in 1947. It was the only full veterinary course in those days in Australia or New Zealand. Now there are 8, including one in New Zealand. I'm a New Zealander, and I went to Sydney as well to do my course, but there is a veterinary school in New Zealand now. Had he been 75 years younger and at Roseworthy, he wouldn't have had to gone interstate or change schools, because, as you know, Roseworthy now is a veterinary school, so he could have done it all at the one school. He graduated from the 5-year course at the end of 1951 and commenced practice in Gawler on the 1st of January 1952. So he didn't mess around. At that stage, there were only 29 qualified vets in South Australia and only 7 in rural practice. All of us who commenced practice in the 50s, we were in single-man practices until we could afford to employ an assistant. As a result, we had to select the correct sort of wife to help us. They had to answer the door, answer the phone, help with surgery, do the books, and produce the children, which they had to look after, and feed us all. They seem to say that they did more work than we did. They probably did. Bruce and I were very lucky in our selection of wives, him with Dawn and me with Mary there. They stuck to us right through in spite of all that, so we must have had something going for us. Bruce got his first assistant in 1961. And as the practice grew, so did his assistants and partners, and the practice extended to Kapunda and Elizabeth. We vets feel that the veterinary profession was grooming him for a future in local government and politics. In 1962, Bruce was elected State President of the Australian Veterinary Association. Even in those early years, he showed great leadership and administrative skills. And in 1966, he was elected Federal President of the Australian Veterinary Association. And in 1971, the Australian College of Veterinary Scientists was formed, and in 1973, he also became President of that body. So we feel we were grooming him for local government and politics. In conclusion, I'd like to add that in 2005, Bruce, Dawn, Mary and I went together on the Trans-Siberian Railway from Beijing through China, Mongolia, Siberia, Russia and Finland. The Easticks were a wonderful company, and we all agree that it was one of the best trips that any of us had ever done. Happy birthday, Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Ric Matthews. Neil will go straight on with the next speaker, who is Her Worship the Mayor of Gawler, Redman. Would you like to come in? You can see the thread in all this. Ric has mentioned the apprenticeship of getting Bruce ready for politics and local government, and he did just that, of course, as we know. So, Karen, it's up to you to fill in that next piece.
Thank you, Lance. Can you hear me all right? Is that good? That's good.
Leave the lipstick on.
Oh, thank you. You don't want any? No, I've got some in my purse. It's all good. Okay, right. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to speak. It's my pleasure to speak about Bruce's local government involvement here in Gawler. I class it as exemplary service, and as a mayor of nearly 3 years, I think I know a little bit about the trials and tribulations of being in charge of local government, particularly here in Gawler. And let me tell you, it's complex fun and sometimes an absolute pain in the arse. So, excuse my French, sorry. So it's my pleasure to speak tonight, ladies and gentlemen, about Bruce. A few days ago, I met Bruce in his home. He invited me into his home because I needed to know what it was like being an elected member in the 60s and a mayor in the late 60s and early 70s and then in the 90s, because I obviously wasn't there. I was a young child in the 60s. I actually used to swim at the swimming club, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so Bruce welcomed me into his home, and I recorded his conversation around his many, many years in local government, and his memory is so sharp, and I was able to document from a beautiful audio perspective with that wonderful voice of Bruce Eastick telling his story about what it was like when he was on council, and even a little bit before. So I'd like to take you back to the 1960s, the early 60s, and Bruce here, young Bruce in his 30s, full of energy and fresh ideas, not much different from today. Bruce was already heavily involved in local affairs, as we've just heard, as a successful vet. We've heard from Lance about the deal with Aero Motors, because I had that in my speech, sorry. Yeah. But that's all gone, it's gone now, taken it out, it's all good. Because he did so many thousands of miles, didn't he, being a very successful vet, being on committees. He was known as someone who could get things done, and he still is known as someone who can get things done. And so it was a given that Bruce would drive the Rotary initiative to build the new Gawler and Districts pool. And if you go down to our pool, which is just down the road here, as we all know, it still says Gawler and Districts swimming pool on the actual structure. Council, though, and Bruce, these are Bruce's words, was not that supportive, however. This didn't stop Bruce, as you would probably guess, and despite a rather, and I've used the word recalcitrant, which is my word, Bruce used the word conservative, and maybe he may have said the word old, but I'll use the word conservative, elected member group, and despite that, the build was achieved. Interestingly, a popular vote, and I think Bruce might have been behind that, had occurred, which of course enabled the project to succeed, and we've all been able to enjoy. And I think I'd like to recognise the president of the Gawler Amateur Swimming Club over there, Therese Willis, who happens to be my sister, and long-term association with this wonderful community, and of course other members of the committee of the Gawler Amateur Swimming Club who continue to deliver on a beautiful community pool and getting kids to learn to swim. The frustration with the council continued when they took over the official opening of the event, because it was a success, so we needed to do an opening, and Bruce tells me that the committee that he was involved with invited the governor. The council then took it over so that they could welcome the governor, leading to Bruce declining an invitation to attend. So in Bruce's words, I believe in sticking to a principle and carrying it on and including the people, and so he wasn't going to back down. He didn't agree with what was going on. He wasn't going to attend that event come hell or high water. And so he stuck to his principles. It was no surprise then that Bruce put his name in, his words, putting his name in, after a Williston councillor stood down and he was duly elected only just by 1 or 2 votes. And I'm sure Dr. Eastick is going to tell me when I get it wrong, because he's listening very carefully, and I hope I do get it right. He was duly elected in 1963 as ward councillor for Williston. And from there, his local government experience and his journey down politics started. And he was involved in more initiatives, including, and I only mention a few, the purchase of Conley Park. Bruce has told me this story before. It was a very controversial time because, again, I think the state government was going to put in half the money. That's right, isn't it, Bruce? Half the money. And so council was up for only half, and it wasn't a huge amount, a few £1,000s. And as Bruce says, it was a reasonable amount. It wasn't a lot of money. But another battle that resulted in yet another public vote. I wonder who drove that public vote, which again endorsed this now important addition to our town. What a wonderful legacy we have with Conley Park. I was at a youth forum yesterday, a youth summit, and the kids absolutely love it. Primary school kids going to Gawler schools, high school kids, they all rave about Conley Park, and we have people like Bruce Eastick to thank for that wonderful battle that he effectively won. Meals on Wheels kitchen, the dam construction at the old rifle range, and that's your involvement, Lance Hatcher, apparently. Now tell me if I'm wrong, which allowed stormwater to be piped under the racecourse and out to the Clifford Road drain. And I believe you were town manager at Manapara, is that right, at the time? Yeah. So a little bit of a link between a long-term public servant and long-term Rotarian in Lance Hatcher as well, long-term connection. Of course, the Gawler Aged Cottage Homes in 1969, a really, really good model of retirement living that includes a social housing component that continues to be needed today. As we lose our public housing, places like the Gawler Aged Cottage Homes is becoming more and more important. I think we'll hear from Mr Humphrey George around the importance of that work. And I'd like to acknowledge Helen Sands, the new chair of the Gawler Aged Cottage Home, who's sitting down there with members of that community. In 1967, after chairing many council meetings due to the sitting mayor being ill and effectively not turning up to meetings, Bruce thought he'd run for mayor. Why not? He was acting as mayor, he was chairing all the meetings. He lost. Then in 1968, the incumbent mayor died. So he tried again and beat Cess Creedon to become mayor between 68 and 1970. He continued in the role for the first 2 years of his term as member for Light. And he talked about I said, well, how did you manage that? It obviously is a very big role, being the local member and also being the mayor. You could do that back in those days. And he said, well, the people, I made sure that I had the balance right, and in the end it was always up to the people. I always made sure that I could deliver on my contribution to the community. He resigned the mayoralty, though, when he became the leader of the opposition in 1972. He'd made that choice. Fast forward to the early 90s, and with the death of Bob Bartlett, Bruce put his name in again and was elected as mayor in 93 till the year 2000. After the 1992 flood disaster, which many of us remember, and around about the time of taking up the mayoral role, Bruce was asked by the then Premier Lynn Arnold, of course was a Labor Premier, but much respect for Dr Eastick. He was asked by Lynn Arnold to chair a new committee that eventually led to the formation of the Gawler River Floodplain Management Authority. Bruce tells me he called a meeting at the now Elderly Centre, all the councils that would be involved in this visionary project. And I'd like to acknowledge Ian Baldwin, who is the current chair of this authority, who is here tonight. Thank you, Ian, there you are, who's working very hard at the moment, Ian. You're doing a fantastic job, from what I can see. This regional authority has been very influential in improving flood mitigation along the Gawler River catchment, not least of all, of course, the Bruce Eastick Dam, and what a fitting name for that dam along the North Parra. Although, as Bruce puts it, remember, young, energetic, full of ideas, that's never gone away. Procrastination comes to mind, says Bruce, because he thinks of all the opportunities lost with the authority over the years to fix some of the problems along the catchment. Things were going too slowly, and I can see Ian going, yes, yes, yes. But we get there. Ladies and gentlemen, there is so much to tell about this extraordinary man who describes his greatest achievement as the opportunity to represent the community. What a beautiful, simple aim. What a wonderful achievement. It just nails it. Congratulations, Dr. Bruce Eastick AM, on your 90th birthday. I think we would all agree how glad we are that you stuck to your principles, you carried it on, and above all, you have included the community every step of the way. Thank you.
Mr. Humphrey George AM. Thank you.
That'll help. Thank you, Lance, very much for the introduction. Dr. the Honourable Bruce Eastick, and the post-nominals really don't tell all of the story about Bruce. He has other awards that... Bruce has other awards such as the Paul Harris Fellowship of the Rotary Club, the Paul Harris Fellowship in Diamonds of the Rotary Club, an honorary member of the Lions Club of Gawler, and a Lions member awarded to him in 1991 for his services to Lions and to the community. It's indeed a privilege to speak about Bruce's achievements on his 90th birthday and celebrate the service he's given to the Gawler community over the many, many years at the national, state and local level. My main association with Bruce has been as a member of the Board of Management of the Gawler District Aged Cottage Homes for 45 years. Now they're referred to as the Gawler Community Retirement Homes, and that's exactly what they are. They belong to this community of Gawler. I believe it's the jewel in the crown of Bruce's community achievements. He, as inaugural chairman, has led that organisation, and prior to that he was the chairperson of the Committee for the Ageing that set up the Aged Cottage Homes and the Elderly Citizen Centre, etc., for 50 years. That's not a bad effort. And we hear he retired on his birthday, Wednesday of his 90th birthday. He had to rearrange things of his family because that was the AGM meeting of the Aged Cottage Homes, and the family had to meet for their breakfast in the morning, and he wasn't available. I'll just give you a brief history of the community homes themselves. They originated as a concept when the then Gawler Council undertook a community needs study in 1967. It was believed and known at the time that the elderly community, and I think Gawler at that stage was the second oldest aged persons community in South Australia, behind Unley. Things have changed quite dramatically when we see the number of youth in the town now. That study highlighted the need for assistance to the elderly, particularly ladies in the ages of 65 or whatever, and men likewise. Many of us will recall those nice little cottages in Gawler South with a nice frontage, but very poor ablution facilities inside and a toilet in the backyard, because the lanes in Gawler South were the lanes for the night cart to come along. That was completely inadequate for people of that age group. So in identifying that, it was decided then there was an organisation called Aged Cottage Homes Act of the Commonwealth Act of 1952, and that from that time the homes in Gawler started. A constitution was adopted defining the aims and objects of the association, and in the main this was to ensure affordable, updated accommodation provided independent living to men over the age of 65 and ladies over the age of 60. That has since changed and it's now available to all ladies and gentlemen over the age of 55, provided they have retired from full-time employment. Land was purchased in Fotheringham Terrace, just over there, and under that Act a grant was sought. The local builder at the time was CAT Doldig, and he was awarded the tender, and as he was a successful one, and we built the first group of 11 units commencing in 1970 under the direction of architect Brian Swan. These are called Elimata, Aboriginal word for home by the river, quite a fitting name. They were funded by contributions from the Commonwealth Grant and the service clubs, so the whole community was involved in that regard. The Commonwealth Grant was some $285,000, and that enabled us to start on those 11 units. Since then, since that particular time, there's been no further Commonwealth funds available for that type of development, which I think is a very big pity. And at times we ran out of money when we were building those. But they were the days when I was treasurer for 12 years in that time, and we were able to take the books of accounts to the bank that we had chosen, the National Australia Bank, and lay the books out on the table and ask the manager that we needed more money. And the question was, well, how much do you need? Well, in the first occasion, we needed another $250,000. And it was rather fortunate that the bank manager at the time was one Jeff Barker, a Rotarian, and a lovely guy. And he set the scene for the Philanthropic Association of the National Australia Bank with the Gawler Aged Cottage Homes. And it was only a matter of then when we ran out of money, provided the books looked okay, we would get another one. And we had then Des Elson, we had David Rayner from the Lions Club, and we had John Wozniak, all community-minded people who didn't worry about, signing off on things. It was just a matter of, provided that we could demonstrate that we'd repay the money, we got the money. Things have changed. With the assistance of these service clubs, both in monetary terms and in physical labour, I can remember Bruce wielding a shovel and probably a pick when we did all the landscaping for the first group of Elimata, the second group of Dawes Village, another 12 units there, the units at Governor in Daly Street, I can't remember, there's 20 there, and then the other thing. The service clubs are those involved mainly in laying out the landscaping and doing all the hard work. And when they knew that Bruce was going to be there, a half a dozen from Rotary would turn up, a half a dozen from Lions, and a half a dozen from Apex. So it was a very good showing of community spirit. It's interesting to note from those original contributions of some $300,000, the homes now belonging to the community have a capital value in excess of $26 million. So the success of the Gawler Community Retirement Homes has, in large, been, as a well-respected organisation, a tribute to the values that Bruce, as chairman of the board for 50 continuous years, has brought to the organisation. That is honesty, integrity and reliability. And could I add to that, stamina. I can't recall him missing a meeting in 50 years of that organisation. And he didn't even miss the AGM this week, did he? And likewise, Bruce has been able to attract board members who have a like interest. And dealing with the elderly, it's always been very difficult because it's not us elderly that have the problem of moving into the retirement homes. It's the kids who say, look, Mum and Dad, think about that, think about that. But as a well-respected community organisation, we really had absolutely no trouble. And many of the elderly people, recognising that Bruce was chairman, had no concerns about the longevity of the organisation and how the money would be spent. Needless to say, it was with the support of his late wife, Dawn, and the children that Bruce has been able to devote his time to this cause. But I've expounded Bruce's virtues, and all of us have another side. I can tell you a number of his secret addictions. Some of it has been mentioned tonight, But the demise of the local car manufacturer, Holden, certainly can't be attributed to the efforts of Bruce's patronage. We recall that Holden advertisement of the 1970s with the catchy jingle, "We have football, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars," which in Bruce's case could be reworded with this jingle, "Bruce loves lawn bowls, Cadbury's chocolates, ice cream and Holden cars." Leaving home at very early hours of the morning when it was a sole veterinary practice, followed by very competent vets in the forms of Bill Hayward, late Bill Hayward, and the late Dick Allen, and now Tony Attio, the living Tony Attio. Bruce, as a single operator, drove from here to Balaclava, those areas, right down to the bottom of the York Peninsula, and then did his day's work. And why I say he's addicted to chocolates, because that was in his bag, chocolate after chocolate, to keep him going. Isn't that true, Bruce? Until such time as his gallbladder said, enough is enough. I also tell that he likes to finish his night meal with ice cream. And the Holden cars, as it was mentioned earlier, 47 in all, as Bruce has gone through in that time, 47. And he and the late Dr. Vin Rice vied for the position of taking the first cab off the rank through Aero Motors, through Jack Curnow, when it became available. I think Bruce just pipped Vin Rice on many of those occasions. We hear tonight that Bruce was recently awarded the icon of Roseworthy College. I believe Bruce is an icon of Gawler, and I can well see the time when a James Martin statue of the time of Bruce Eastick statue should be erected outside the town hall. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I ask you to join me in congratulating Bruce on his 90th birthday and the contribution made to the involvement in the Gawler Community Retirement Homes. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Humphrey, for that description of Bruce's part in yet another community project. And that's only touching the edge of his work in the whole time. We talk about meetings, and Bruce, in 1962, wandered over to my place, and I was out in the back garden, and he said, "What are you doing Monday night?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Would you like to come to Rotary?" I said, "Yes." I sort of had a hint that something might be happening. As a result of that, in July 1962, I was inducted into the Rotary Club of Gawler. Thank you, Bruce, for giving me the opportunity. And I've now completed 55 years in this July. I can't catch Bruce because he started when the club started. But he had the good fortune to be involved in a club starting on my wife's birthday. So that was the 8th of March. It was a very important day, not only for my wife, but for the Gawler Rotary Club. I'm just doing a little bit of fill-in because I know Stan has only just got his meeting finished and he's ready to go. So please, would you give your attention to Mr. Stan Evans, former Member of Parliament, around the time that Bruce was in the same activity, and he is going to talk about Bruce's activities in the Parliament of South Australia.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Thank you for everybody attempting to listen to me. They told me I had 6 minutes and I got 5 subjects, so 6 minutes a subject, that's 30 minutes, so that'll be all right. And I hope I don't get the lipstick off the mayor's lips, holding this too close, but I'll do my best. On the bit of paper that's in front of you, it shows that I'm Stan Evans AM. It doesn't mean anything to do with Australia medal or anything, it just means antique male. My wife's the one that has the honours. Bruce I first met a little bit in campaigning before May 1970. I went in 68 as a candidate, as a state member, and Bruce went in May 1970. That was the time when we changed the number of parliamentarians from 39 to 47, and we were called the LCL. He came in at a time when there was a storm within the party, and that happens in political parties. Even today, you might notice. And there was a cartoon in the paper of an animal, and it looked like a giraffe or something who had collapsed, and the jockey was a chap named Eastick. The animal was called LCL, and the caption said, and I'll read the exact words of that, you really do need, you certainly need a vet. And that's what the party needed at the time. And I want to quote a couple of things, and of course you were told earlier that Bruce was still the mayor at that stage, even though he was a Member of Parliament, and that's unusual. And his seat took in Gawler, Barossa, Kapunda, Clare and Eudunda. Over the years it changed at certain times as the boundaries were reallocated. But he went in and the editorial of the news said, it's the toughest test for any Polly to take over at the time that Bruce did take over. It was tough. We'd had a leader virtually resign. There was arguments within the party, and he took up the reins, and he'd only been in Parliament 2 years at that stage, and it was a tough test for him. The news, the Rescue wrote these words, and I'll quote other people so I don't get into trouble. Rescue in interviews said, Bruce always indicated, be what you are, be yourself, and he does not suffer fools. And Michael Cudmore at the same time said of Eastick, he had a basic integrity capacity for hard work, almost bewildering attention to detail. And those of you who know Bruce know that fairly describes him as a person. And that was not my words, they were words of people who are writing for the press that sometimes can kick you in the guts and other times they can pick you up. And so that was their attitude. He also went on to Cardinal said, Eastick's a very serious and determined character, and he always stressed, be yourself. And I think that would have come down from Rufus' connection to the Scouts. As you know, he was a Scout Master for some time, and that attitude would have been an attitude that they encouraged the Scouts to have, to be yourself. And Bruce emphasised, well, I read some of the articles about him, as he emphasised that several times, he was always going to be himself. In other words, he wasn't likely to walk into Parliament in pink shorts or anything. He would walk in as an individual that was respected by the community. The 1975 elections was a close vote. We didn't win government, one seat we were 350 short, but we won more than 50% of the vote for the state. But we didn't win more than 50% of the seats. And you may have read recently, in recent times, the last 12 months, when the new boundaries have been recommended that come up now, the people drawing it up admitted that they've been drawn against the party which Bruce represented and others after him for 40 years. And now they've been brought back into a line where it may be a greater opportunity to win it, but no guarantees. But Bruce didn't have that opportunity. He fought it, got more than half the people of the state to support him to become Premier, but he lost out on one seat, and the votes in that seat were 350, is what he didn't have to carry him through. When Tonkin won the government in 1979, through to 82, Labor took over in 82, Bruce Eastick became the Speaker under the Tonkin government. And later on, after 3.5 years as Speaker, he was granted by the Queen the title of Honourable. If you've been the Speaker for more than 3 years, you're entitled to be called Honourable, and he was there for 3.5 years when he was titled given the title of Honourable. And also, that period of time in 1980, he had the opportunity to go to the British Parliament with others that represented the Commonwealth countries. I think it was about 25 people altogether. Bruce will correct me if I'm wrong. And they went to England for 4 weeks. Had the opportunity to see how the English Parliament worked, the House and the Commons. Had the opportunity to meet the Queen and also to meet the Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher. And I'm sure Bruce appreciated and took in what happened and would still remember it today, because that's the sort of attitude he has as an individual. I might say he's determined to always make sure he learns what he can and retains it in his knowledge. When he was with the Tongan government as a shadow minister, he had local government, environment and emergency services, and he carried those duties out very well. I was the whip, so I was around the place, but I learned to respect him as an individual. You could trust him. He'd say what he thought. If you thought you were wrong, he'd tell you, and he wouldn't go behind your back. And so he had that job as shadow minister for those 3 years under the Tongan government. I think it's worth noting that sometimes, if you're a teetotaler, some things can be embarrassing, and Bruce, I believe, is virtually a teetotaler. My wife would tell you one story about a Liberal Party show where they didn't serve anything, any alcohol, and she had to tell them to go and find some soft drink somewhere. But we were at Government House. Bruce was the leader at the time, and they came around with a tray with champagne and red wine and white wine and beer, like a drink, and Bruce said, a soft drink please, or orange juice. And believe it or not, they didn't have one at Government House. And they had to go up the street, they sent something up the street, and within a short time, no more than a quarter of an hour, they were back with Bruce for a drink, and I don't know whether Bruce remembers it or not, but they had to go and find him a soft drink because he wasn't going to have any of their alcohol. Even though he's left the Parliament, I was Secretary of the former members of the Parliament, which takes in all parties, whatever they are, Independent, Liberal, Labor, whatever, former members. Bruce has remained as a member of that group, and we have a luncheon twice a year, and they have bowls once a year interstate, but I've only ever gone once, but Bruce has gone several times, and he's enjoyed the company of his colleagues that have worked with him over the years. To me, Bruce is a gentleman. He's got a strength of character that some people don't have. He wouldn't go behind your back. You would know where you stood. And even though he may have been defeated as leader, he still worked 100% for the party. And when asked by the press, did he back Tonkin? He said, I'll back the leader. I'm a member of the party, and I'll back the leader, whoever it is, and I always will. And that's recorded to read several times to read. And that's what he did. There's no doubt about that. In public life, there's some things that some enjoy and others don't have the opportunity to enjoy. My wife Barbara has put up with me over the years. But Bruce had a wonderful wife. And if you think about what he had to do, whether it be in local government or other issues involved with, and with Parliament, Dawn was always there to support him, help him, and be a backup. And they're a conduit. If you have a good partner in political life, it's a conduit for what's happening, because they listen to what people are saying behind your back, and they can just tip you off where the spikes are and where the honey is and where the problems are. And Dawn, to him, was a great person with a great family, and looking after the family while the partner's not there. I know, and my wife knows, that it can be tough. But Bruce had the backing of his family, just not his immediate family, others a bit broader out, all of the political life he had. And we as a state should be grateful for the effort he put in. As a Member of Parliament, whether Leader of the Opposition or the Member for Light, he did that with dedication, determination, and in all honesty, very sincere and a great man. And Bruce, happy birthday and congratulations for what you've given to this state and the community. Good luck.
We've got a competition. Thank you, Stan. And that makes yet another picture of our guest right tonight. You know, we almost pulled off what would probably be some sort of a record tonight. Unfortunately, two members of the party that was going to be here were subsequently unable to make it. If Malcolm and Catherine Buckley, who were coming, the Honourable Malcolm Buckley and Catherine, were here, we would have had in this room three members serving the District of Light since 1970. Bruce being number one, Malcolm being number two, and the current member, Tony Piccolo, is still number one. So we nearly pulled off what I think would be somewhat of a record if we had that. It shows how consistent this electorate is. We come now to a fairly important part of the evening, and that is to come to the cutting of the cake. But before we do that, could I ask you to replenish your glasses and to save a rush to the bar? If you have to use some water, that'll be fine. I'm going to invite the chairman of the Gawler District Special Events, Mr. Kim Popka, if he will propose the toast to our guest of honour, and then we will come to the cutting of the cake and the presentation of a birthday card, which is probably a bit unique, I think. And at the end of the cutting of the cake, as is the custom, there is a tune to be had. We have the right man here in Ralph Thatcher, and I'm sure he'll lead us in happy birthday in full force. So, Kim, would you like to come forward?
Ladies and gentlemen, I thought about how we should celebrate and raise our glasses to Bruce, and this is taking off. But I thought it'd be appropriate for us all to actually read out his whole title. But doing so, I considered there's probably more letters than that than there is in a Sri Lankan cricketer's name. So maybe not, and maybe like Lance said earlier on, he's read out the title in full, so I think we better stick to Bruce. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, can you please, if able, to be upstanding, charge your glasses, be upstanding. To Bruce. To Bruce. So, young Bruce, would you like to know now before you cut a couple of cakes in your life? This week? According to family, definitely this week. As a vet, was he a good surgeon? You come around this side, Bruce. Careful, wait. Which has got the names of everyone that's here tonight. Sorry we didn't get you all to sign it, but it would have taken a while. So, yeah, just as a memento, thank you for all you've done for our community. Thank you.
By the way, I'm honoured to do this. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bruce. Happy birthday to you.
Quite hard being the last speaker, but here we go. You can gauge a person's contribution by many measurements, and by any of these, Bruce's contribution to the Rotary Club of Gawler is without peer. As a founding member of the club, he's been a member since March, I forgot it was the 8th of March, 1954. I checked with the district records, and it's actually revealed that with 63 years of service, he's not only the longest serving Rotarian in the Gawler Club, but in the entire Rotary District 9500, which extends over most of South Australia and part of the Northern Territory. What about if we look about just turning up as a measurement? One of the traditions in Rotary is to measure your attendance. And I checked the records, and Bruce's attendance over those 63 years averages over 90%, which, given his other commitments, which we've heard about tonight, shows his dedication to Rotary. But people can belong to things for a long time and just make up the numbers. Looking at the positions Bruce has held within the club reveals that the only position he hasn't held is Treasurer. I'm not sure how he dodged that one. He was Secretary from 1956 to 58 and President in 1960-61. He served on all of the various club committees over the years, as well as hosting and acting as counsellor for Rotary Exchange students. As Lance started to tell you, this week at our club function, one of those exchange students, Gloria Angelis, and there's been some photos of her on the show tonight, there's even one when she was actually a Rotary Exchange student, came to visit. And she came from the Philippines to visit Bruce for his 90th birthday. Bruce was her counsellor and his family hosted Gloria during her exchange. At the club dinner on Monday night, Gloria gave an inspirational speech about the impact that experience has had on her life and the high regard that she has had for Bruce. She said she wanted to return to thank him properly for what he had done for her as a 16-year-old. My one regret from that night was that we didn't actually video Gloria's speech, because it was truly inspirational about the things she's done in her life since being a Rotary Exchange student. Since 2002, Bruce has been the club bulletin editor. This is the weekly record of activities of the club. Each week, Bruce records what occurs at our dinner meetings as well as other club activities, and he always finds other interesting information to include in the bulletin. It's a challenging and relentless task, and the only concession the club has made for Bruce's age is to reserve a seat for him near the lectern for the meetings. I only joined Rotary in 2012, so I'm a real newbie, particularly in the company of this room. But my experience of Bruce since my time in the club, I think, exemplifies his character of one of the key tenets of Rotary, which is service above self. Not only does Bruce attend almost every dinner meeting and committee meeting, he's always the first amongst Rotarians to volunteer for actual work. One of the pleasures of cooking a Bunnings barbecue sausage sizzle is the quiet times with Bruce when he'll talk to you about club history. And that oral history is really important for people to learn. As for the village fair, Bruce is almost always amongst the earliest arrivals at 6 a.m, and he works tirelessly erecting the shelters in preparation for the fair. I'm pretty sure he's probably done that for all of the 40 plus years that the fair's been in existence.
There was one year when I got there before Bruce, and I was actually quite concerned that he was ill or something, but he turned up a few minutes later. It's an honour to work beside him for the good of the community. Bruce is a great record keeper, and over the past year he's been feeding me historical information about the Rotary Club for scanning to ensure we have a complete digital record of the club history. He's probably got the only complete set of club annual reports, as well as a folder of other clippings and memorabilia. As well as this, he's been passing on some of the oral history, and I've learnt so much about the Gawler Rotary Club and what it's contributed to the town of Gawler. Some of the things we've heard about tonight. And I think one of the things I've noticed is that his care for the aged of the community started long before he could be counted in their number. He is a true man of Gawler, and it is honour to serve and be a member in the Rotary.
It is now time, and you will appreciate that politicians are given the chance for an address and reply. Bruce, I ask you not to take as long as we have over the night. Oh, no, you won't. But I now invite Bruce to give you his comments on his achievements and tonight's meeting.
Thank you very much, Lance, friends and family. It's a memorable night and one which I won't forget what it's all about. And one of the great advantages of that visit was a reception in number 10 Downing Street with Maggie Thatcher. All of these ideas or these thoughts come back of events which have taken place. My involvement of the 5-year course in Sydney, which was the only veterinary college in the whole of Australasia at that time, and make a decision which saw it come to Gawler, which at the end of 1951 had about 6,000 people, and Salisbury at that stage, which came up almost as far as the Smithfield Hotel, had less than 4,000, but they did have 5,000 dairy cows. And then at a later stage, when the Air Force moved to Edinburgh, and most of the people who were stationed at Edinburgh in those days were English, who'd come out with the B-bombers, the Vulcans, and the various B-bombers that they had associated with the atomic fires up north. They came with them with a very great delight in looking after their dogs and their cats, and their guinea pigs, and their snakes, and various other small animals of that nature. That saw the commencement of by the Housing Trust of Adelaide of a clinic down on Elizabeth Road. And that was then fairly soon afterwards the tail that wagged the dog. We'd go down there on a Tuesday and Thursday night and find anything up to 40, 45 people and their animals through the door. It's great tonight to have people who have been in my employment, both in the veterinary profession, the girls up here. One of them, I told others a while ago, came to relieve somebody going on holiday for 2 weeks, and 13 years later we kicked her out the door. People who have helped me through the parliamentary years, the involvement that I've had with the community, and particularly through Rotary and the opportunities which have opened up, and have seen the ability to provide for the benefit of the community. Thank you ever so much for being a part of that community and being part of those various organisations which it's been my pleasure to be part of. And I'd like particularly to say thank you to the Special Events Group and the Rotary Club and the History Group that have been responsible for organising tonight. It's something I will not forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That basically brings us to the conclusion of the evening. I have in my possession a copy of the Bunyip in 1952, announcing not the Bunyip itself, but an article that appeared in the Bunyip, which Stan Ralston, part of our committee, came along the other night and said, we should have this there. I think pretty much all of that article has been covered in various places tonight, Stan, but if anyone wants to have a look at it, I'm quite happy to show it to you. And it deals with the starting of a veterinary service by Dr. Bruce Eastick. I don't think you were called Dr. then, were you? No, you were Bruce Eastick. I can well remember my father, who was working for the Dawkins family, of which we have the Honourable John Dawkins here tonight. His father and grandfather, my father worked on their sheep station. And I was in, I think, about first or second year high school when he came home one night from work and said, we've got a new vet coming out, has come out today to look at some of the sheep. He seems to know what he's doing. I think he'll make a good job of it. Well, I think Bruce, Dad was right. Distinguished guests, thank you for your attendance. It's been an interesting task to pull it all together from all over Australia, actually, because a lot of our contacts went out into other states. Thank you for being here. Thank you for honouring the work of Bruce. Don't go home yet. If you still want a copy, we've still got to wait for your birthday cake, haven't we? That's being sorted out at the moment. I can hear the chainsaws working out there. Please enjoy some more fellowship while you wait for your birthday cake. Thank you.